Hello there. I'm reacting to what if Obi-Wan saved Padme from Anakin Skywalker. And also, like always, the channel will be in the description below. You want to check out the original video for yourself. And don't forget to subscribe, like, and share to see more of these reaction videos in the future. If you like these reaction videos, why not share them with other people too? In the meantime, and also, check out the original video. I'll put the original video in the description below. If you want to watch the original video, it'll be in the description below. Now let's react to what if Obi-Wan saved Padme from Anakin Skywalker.
Hello. Our story begins on the Mustafar landing platform. Padme and Anakin were talking. She was confessing what had been told to her by Obi-Wan. He was beginning to get upset, and Padme was realizing that despite what Obi-Wan told her, he was right. Anakin had changed. He had done something terrible and Padme didn't want to see it. But now, she couldn't avoid it. Anakin's anger started to rise. The last time she saw this was when he beat the Force out of Rush Clovis. The other time was when he returned from killing the Tusken Raiders. The madness in his eyes that day and his voice were telltale signs of what was to come, and it came. But what made her feel better in that moment was him saying that he was a Jedi. He knew he was better than that. Padme had hoped that he would get a grip after she showed noticeable concern, and they talked about it even more on numerous occasions. She backpedaled away from him as he started to grow in his fury, though the pinnacle of his anger came when Obi-Wan showed up at the top of the ramp of Padme's ship. Anakin turned to Padme and blamed her for bringing Obi-Wan here to kill him. This wasn't true, but he was delusional at this point. As Anakin's hand stretched forward, Kenobi felt everything move in slow motion. It was like he was inside the palace of Sundari watching Satine joke. He wouldn't make the same mistake twice, would he? Padme may have not been a lover, but she was a very close friend, and he wouldn't damn her to a death in vain. Before Anakin could ever reach out with the Force and actually begin choking her, Kenobi launched his arms forward and used the Force against Anakin. Skywalker's Force barrier was much too strong even for Kenobi at this point, but it was enough of a hit to jar him from his concentration. Kenobi walked down the ramp and looked at Padme. Not a word needed to be said between the two of them. She knew exactly what he would say without him having to say it. She very quickly got behind him as Kenobi put himself between Anakin and Padme. It was a dangerous position to be in, especially knowing how defensive or angry Skywalker could get over the smallest thing. But this was a new animal. This was no longer Anakin. He was consumed by Darth Vader, just as Yoda said. Obi-Wan tried to negotiate. While Anakin did attempt to choke Padme, she was alright, so perhaps there was a chance to make things come to an end reasonably. Though there wasn't much that could be said. The duel would carry on throughout the entire facility, their lightsabers blasting away at each other. Inside the Naboo Star ship, Padme came in contact with Bail Organa, one of her closest friends. She informed him of the situation, to which she was surprised. He knew so much of what was going on. He informed her everything that he was aware of at this point, and they set coordinates for the potential linking location. They decided that Polis Massa would be the place to go. They'd be safest there. Once the call ended, Padme retreated from the cockpit of the ship. She was in immense pain. It was both physical and emotional. The disappointment and shock of what Anakin did felt so surreal, especially being that he learned he was just becoming a father. She didn't want to believe that he would do what he did, denying what she had seen him do before, only for it to become an even more deadly reality. Because R2 noticed the Naboo starship, he went over to investigate, finding 3PO and Padme. He would stay there with them. Padme laid down on her bed inside of the quarters and felt a rush of pain. The amount of stress she incurred from the last few hours were enough to kill her, let alone the fact that Anakin seemed genuinely mad. The thought of Obi-Wan dying or Anakin dying was still hard in the process. She still loved Anakin, that wasn't the issue, but she couldn't be around him. Hopefully neither of them would die, but she knew that was wishful thinking. After what felt like hours, Obi-Wan would return and ask if she was alright. She was still conscious, but she felt terrible. Obi-Wan told her that he'd make sure everything would be alright. After making sure 3PO plotted a course for Polis Massa, he went back to her and started a light conversation. Nothing to stress her out, but to try and make her feel a little bit more at ease. He did apologize for sneaking aboard her ship, and she did learn that, as far as he knew, Anakin was going to die. It was hard to hear, but she had to accept it. Obi-Wan was extremely comforting, using the Force as a mechanism to help her find her ease. Kenobi had a calming essence to begin with, but he was able to use the Force to pull from all those essences around the galaxy who adored her. It wasn't a direct source, so it was very tiresome for him, but he pulled from her family and her closest friends, using it to embrace her in a comforting aura. The two of them talked lightly, giving joyful stories and sharing delightful moments from their lives. Obi-Wan did most of the talking, so he pulled from times with Satine, Qui-Gon, or any numerous Jedi inside the Order he grew with. It was very hard for Kenobi, but Padme was fading in and out of being fully present, so she didn't really connect the dots. Obi-Wan did it as he was telling these little stories. He realized that each of these people in these stories were dead, and he was more alone than ever before. When they finally arrived to Polis Massa, Padme was doing a little better, but the assistance of the medical droids really helped her get through the birthing process with ease. Obi-Wan was with her throughout the entire thing, as Yoda and Bail watched over her. After around 30 minutes, Padme woke up, and she was next to Obi-Wan, who had been waiting for her. He expressed that her children were fine and taken care of. This brought her ease, but the sadness surrounding Anakin still lurked. What helped her most was the fact that she wasn't force-choked. It gave her the energy to be more prepared for dealing with the loss of her husband. She wanted to believe that there would have still been good within him, but he was gone. She needed to accept that. As Obi-Wan was helping Padme, using the Force as a warm blanket of comfort, Lord Vader was born on Coruscant. He was informed by his new master that Padme was killed by him, being that she was dead, apparently. Vader would be consumed by evil. He would have to live with the knowledge that he was the reason she died. Maybe he didn't end up choking her and killing her himself, but it was because he wasn't strong enough that she died. Inversely, he did shift some blame onto Obi-Wan, though it was more of a distraction than an actual focus. The real culprit was his weakness. Palpatine didn't actually know if Padme was dead. To ensure that she was killed if she dare return, he made sure there was a funeral on Naboo. On top of that, making sure that if she did show up, she was killed. There'd be no reason for Vader to know about any of this, so he was locked away in bacta tanks and left as a secret operative inside of this new empire. Vader became acquainted with his new way of life and had a couple of learning sessions with his new master. Nothing too intense, more or less explaining what his new role would be in this new empire. Once that was finished, Vader would be sent to the bacta tanks to heal. It was all a part of Sidious's plan to make sure Anakin felt like he was still cared for, when the reality is, he proved his usefulness, which would last until he would be replaced. On Polis Massa, Padme was making a full recovery. A lot of this recovery came from Obi-Wan's usage of the Force. He spent a lot of time inside the archives after Satine's death. He never thought that he'd have to use these powers on someone he loved dearly, but he wanted to know just in case. These powers weren't a Force heal, so if a trooper was blown in half, he wouldn't be able to restruct them. What Obi-Wan did was simply provide comfort. That was what he learned, the comforting aura of the Force. Padme was in a lot of pain, physically and emotionally, so what Obi-Wan did was give her the comfort she needed to emotionally be stable enough to survive the physical pain. It is what she needed after all. The knowledge and feeling of being loved and cared for took such an overwhelming positive effect on her that she was able to recover from her struggles with relative ease. It didn't mean everything was easy, it just made it slightly easier. Kenobi simultaneously was very tired and emotionally worn out. He was also very physically tired too, especially from the duel, but the weight of the loss of his order hurt more than anything else. In the span of 24 hours, he lost all of his brothers and sisters. His clones turned on him, and he was responsible for the death of Anakin Skywalker, a man consumed by darkness because Obi-Wan couldn't be there for him. As Padme, Bail, Yoda, Obi-Wan, and the twins left Polis Massa, it became evident that Yoda wished to go into hiding. This ignited a fire within Padme. As a new mother, she wouldn't stand for letting the Empire rule over the galaxy. She wouldn't be content letting her children grow up under the authoritarian power that was called the Empire. She wanted to do something immediately. The fighting presence that had been so prominent within her for the majority of her life had returned tenfold. She was ready to take on the Empire alone, but something became apparent to her. Obi-Wan wasn't himself. Yoda wasn't acting great either, but the bearing of pain seemed almost evident on Kenobi's face. He was worn. Padme spoke aloud to the three of them, suggesting that instead of sitting back, they needed to do something. Of course, as they were traveling, Bail was informed by Mon Mothma that Padme had died and they were holding a closed casket funeral on Naboo. Obi-Wan didn't even acknowledge this, and Yoda was adamant that he was going to be left on Dagobah. He had training for Obi-Wan to complete, but he was going to go into exile until the time was right. Padme wouldn't be able to change Yoda's mind, so once he was dropped off, she and Obi-Wan had a very extensive talk. They'd been friends for 13 years. They knew each other well, but she couldn't deny that he was hurting. They both were, and because he had done so much for her, she needed to do as such for him. The two of them split off from Bail as the Tantive 4 abandoned Dagobah. Bail and Padme spoke, while Obi-Wan oversaw the departure of Yoda. Despite Obi-Wan being so very out of character, he was willing to stay along the course, and he couldn't convince Yoda to change his mind. It was very demoralizing, and it only pushed Obi-Wan further away from himself. He felt more lost than ever before. He was instructed to go into exile, he was given his training for becoming a Force ghost and whatnot. But that didn't mean anything to him. He felt the desire to do something in the now, but he couldn't defeat Palpatine alone, not without Yoda. So in hyperspace from Dagobah to Naboo, Obi-Wan and Padme talked with each other extensively. She didn't know to what degree Obi-Wan helped her, but she felt as if he was responsible for doing something. She believed he saved her life, but she couldn't confirm that. She felt that she owed him at least something for that, and so she told him that she understood his frustration and his feelings. She understood that he was suffering and he felt alone, that they were in this together. They'd been friends through some of the most trying times in galactic history. She believed that as friends, they needed to support each other through this. Obi-Wan agreed, but he didn't have the strength to continue the
This isn't Charmin.
Come on.
No wonder I don't feel as clean.
Here's Charmin Ultra Strong.
My bottom's been...
didn't have the strength to continue.
Skip the ad. Hopefully they don't even want to add in this reaction. If you guys are enjoying this reaction, I'm gonna do more reactions later on tonight, or yeah. I might do more reactions later. But yeah. So far this is going well. You're going well. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Alright, Kenobi. So I can get in here. You're left to exile like always. Classic. Now let's see if they can stop the Empire. Hopefully. Or bring them back. We gotta think. They're gonna like copy your bring back Skywalker, right? Let's see.
Fight. His heart was so broken. His only student turned into the most evil man in the galaxy. Padme told him that it wasn't his fault, and while she didn't know everything, she knew that Anakin, the real Anakin Skywalker, would never blame him for what happened. She repeated what Obi-Wan said to her on Coruscant, reminding him that they all had been deceived by a lie. He couldn't possibly know everything. Their conversation ended with a larger hug, one that both Padme and Obi-Wan were desperately in need of. This entire conversation certainly helped Obi-Wan's recovery, and he felt a little more optimistic. But that wasn't the end of it. He needed to do some work. So, just as a precaution, they shaved his beard. Bail gave Obi-Wan some Alderaanian robes, which were a bit oversized because of Bail's height, and then they went to Naboo. Obi-Wan wasn't thrilled about losing the beard, but the whole purpose of this operation was to see if they could find anyone else close to Padme. Of course, Bail could do it no problem, but if any other Jedi survived, they needed anyone they could get. Obi-Wan was relatively unrecognizable, even accidentally running into a squad of clones who didn't recognize him. They forcibly removed his hood, but the clean-shaven Obi-Wan was impossible to detect, which meant that when Obi-Wan found Ahsoka, she was confused. But when she realized who it was, she wrapped him up in a massive embrace. She and he had never been that close, but everyone's emotions were super on edge. She thought she lost Obi-Wan, Anakin, and Padme, though it wasn't exactly comforting when she learned the full truth. But because of Obi-Wan, Ahsoka and Rex were in. They joined up with Padme, Bail, and Obi-Wan inside the Tantive 4. Though one outlier would be Rex, who despite being interested in helping the birth of this rebellion or the resistance, whatever they wanted to call it, against the Empire, he wanted to help his brothers. They were in need of help, many of them never holding such grievances against their Jedi generals to kill them the way they did. Hopefully, something could be done in the way of righting their wrongs, but no one knew that yet. So Rex at one point or another would depart. All the while, Padme, Bail, Obi-Wan, and Ahsoka would come up with some plans of attack against the Sith. They thought they had all the information, and the fact that Palpatine covered up Padme's supposed death, she had all the tools needed to take him down. However, both Bail and Obi-Wan were adamant that if she showed her face,
Yeah, they could, or could not. That's what they got. So yeah, the fact that Palpatine planned like a funeral, saying that she did die, and then she came back. Yeah, that would look kind of awkward for Palpatine to just make a funeral for someone who died and then come back.
she would be hunted down by the Sith Lord and killed. So instead of showing her face in public, Padme would need to use a transmitter code and speak to the Republic through a hologram. The transmitter code would run through the Senate chambers, and the signal would be transported from a Naboo starship planted on a landing dock on Coruscant, so the signal could not be traced back to wherever she was. Padme herself could not go to Naboo. There were suggestions, but she needed to be somewhere safe for not just herself, but the twins. Obi-Wan therefore suggested Tython. It was close to Coruscant, and to be able to tell if the Empire was coming for them or not. It was all agreed upon. As Bail and Padme began their planning, Obi-Wan and Ahsoka had their own little talk. This would be more pain to add to Obi-Wan's current stock. His losses were mounting up, and nothing would hurt him more than telling Ahsoka what became of her master. Her reaction would shatter what little remained of his heart. Ahsoka was both in a state of disbelief and fury, realizing that all of their men, all of those troopers inside that Venator, from Jesse to the newest man in the division, died for no reason. They died because of Anakin. That was a burden of pain that she couldn't remove. She knew her teacher had elements of darkness. She had seen it throughout her own training. However, she never would have anticipated that he could become so evil. It seemed unlikely, but apparently, it was inevitable. Though, on the other hand, Ahsoka, just as Obi-Wan did, found adoration in both Luke and Leia. Padme was keeping the names she and Anakin came up with. The two of them didn't want to know the gender of their child, being so close to birth, especially when they thought it'd be one kid instead of twins, so they came up with two names. Leia would be the name for the girl, and Luke for the boy. When she had twins, she just decided to name them after the names they decided on, almost in a way, a memory of the man who her husband was before he died. Obi-Wan and Ahsoka spoke about their potential strategies, and it was made clear that despite Obi-Wan holding on to the Jedi way, he didn't want to force it onto Ahsoka. He respected her decision, and he wanted her to make sure she felt like he was listening to everything she desired. So their mandate was to be supportive. They wouldn't be engaging with Sidious. Their main hope was that Padme and Bail could get him removed from office. In the meantime, the two of them would need to strategize, so that they could be as helpful as possible. When they arrived on Tython, a small camp was set up for the two former Jedi, Padme and the twins. It wasn't much, but it was protective, though there wasn't much of a concern for anything carnivorous on Tython. The planet was lush and beautiful, with very little elements that could be dangerous to infants. Tython was wound with the Force, and it would be a protective barrier from the darkness. With the plans in motion, Bail returned to the Senate, and when a session was called within the week, Padme was ready. Palpatine wasn't even present at the session. The new Vizier of the Empire was overseeing the Senate sessions now. Bail made a motion and it was brought forward. What followed would be a surprise to everyone. A hologram was shown to the Senate and the people were all outraged, but for the wrong reasons. It seemed as if Padme and all of her allies were separatist loyalists. The Senate wouldn't stand for that, and truthfully Mas Amedda began twisting the words against Bail. He blamed the entire message on a fabricated attempt to turn the Empire against itself. Mas said that in the process of trying to gain power, Bail used Padme's last messages to turn the people against the Emperor. Mas was obviously wrong, but the usage of outrage turned people in the Senate against Padme and her allies. Though, like Mas, most of the people present inside the session didn't believe it was the real Padme Amidala, believing she created the message before her death, so there was no concern for their little revolt. Bail was forced from the Senate chambers and was chased out by his counterparts. It was a terrible situation and it made everything feel wrong. Palpatine was informed by Mas Amedda of what happened, and he immediately sent out death squads to kill Padme. She was the only individual that could legitimately affect Darth Vader. Sidious couldn't allow that to happen. The irony is, both Vader and Padme assumed the other was dead. With death squads of the elite clones hunting down allies of Senator Amidala, the Senate very quickly learned that there would be no fighting the Emperor. There'd be no standing up to him either, because there was no other power in the universe aside from him. Those who had aligned themselves with Padme in the past very quickly surrendered over their power and joined with the Empire. Those who were caught and didn't were simply replaced, because everyone in an empire is replaceable. Bail and Mon were able to escape the planet and eventually make their way for Tython. Ahsoka would be returning to the planet at the same time. She and Rex decided to go and return to the wreckage. She retrieved her Jedi weapons there, being that she was now actually involved in the process of fighting the Empire. When Bail and Mon got the Tython, they informed Padme, Obi-Wan, and Ahsoka of the entire situation. Everything was progressively getting worse, and there was very little that the Jedi could do to stop it. The Flame of Hope had seemingly run its course. Padme was right. Liberty dies under a thunderous applause. Sidious had won. There was no combating the evil Sith Lord. There were very few of them. Aside from those that currently resided on Tython, there wasn't anyone standing up to the might of the Empire. How could they? They couldn't side with the Separatists. The clones were all controlled by inhibitor chips, and the Jedi were all but extinct. Hell, even the Grand Master of the Jedi Order had gone into hiding. What remained was a ragtag group of survivors. None of them could be classified by what they were before or during the war. Whether it be Jedi, clone, or senator, every single one of them survived their own little purge. The burden of blame sat on Padme and Obi-Wan's shoulders the most. They were the closest to Anakin, and being that he was so instrumental in tearing down the fabric of the Republic, they felt accountable for what had happened. It wasn't their fault, obviously, and Anakin hadn't alleviated them of such burdens. As they tried to rally together, it was suggested by Ahsoka that she and Rex could try and sneak into Imperial facilities. Perhaps they could lure Sidious out and kill him. But the reality is, as mentioned by Obi-Wan, if they killed Sidious, he'd become a martyr. The system would rally around him, harder than ever before, because they wouldn't be able to gauge how corrupt he truly could become. All they had to base their concerns off of were the fact that Palpatine won them the war, and the Empire was stronger than the Republic could have ever dreamed to be. It was the end of an era. Ahsoka noticed how hopeless the situation had become. The typically radiant Padme had lost her fire, and Obi-Wan had clearly been demoralized by the mounting of personal losses incurred in his personal life. The burden of weight sat on both their shoulders, perhaps more than anyone else in the galaxy, and Ahsoka believed that if she could kill Sidious, or perhaps even do something else, she would be able to help them. So, she and Rex started to devise a plan of infiltration. However, they needed more allies for such an operation. The idea behind this move was for them to try and get dirt on Palpatine, or try and turn the Senate against him. Literally, they had to try and do something. Ahsoka and Rex started planning. This was all done through hologram, being that Rex had once again departed after dropping her back off on Tython. Obi-Wan and Padme, on the other hand, had to have some alone time with each other. They were the closest to Anakin, closer than anyone else in the galaxy, so for them, they needed to be there for each other, because only they understood Anakin the way they did, and only they could be the uplifting force to help each other through this. They spoke out about their grievances, and they talked about their fears. The Empire seemed unconquerable. It felt as if there wasn't a fault in the system, but they had to try and find it. If they allowed Palpatine to gain any more power, he could offset the status quo for entire generations. He could wipe out Force users across the galaxy. He could make slavery a legal process. He could be everything the galaxy didn't need. Padme and Obi-Wan believed that if they killed Sidious, it would disrupt everything in all the wrong ways. A bigger fear than taking on the Empire was if the Empire began.
Oh my god.
Taking on the Empire was if the Empire began to struggle, would the former Separatists revolt against them and another war begin? The answer felt like it should have been a yes, but if Palpatine was pulling the strings the entire time, then there was no foreseeable way that the former CIS would turn against him. Ahsoka wasn't listening into the conversation. She was a little further away, but the change in tone within both Padme and Obi-Wan's voice caught her attention from where she was. She heard the last part regarding pulling of strings for former Separatist worlds. Ahsoka then came up with an idea, one that she would reveal to Rex. It'd be as simple as find the remaining droid armies. If they could discover the location of all the shut down droids, perhaps they could get a recording of Anakin or Sidious speaking out to the facilities and forcing the droids to shut down. It was their direct action that turned every droid off, after all. And while it was obvious that Palpatine would want that done anyways, the nature of him being behind it as the former Separatist leader could potentially unite people against him. Rex believed it was a good idea. Luckily, they were early enough into this new Imperial era, where there were still loose Separatist fleets floating around, dead in space. The larger issue was the fact that once they got into the vessels, they'd have to turn them on, and in doing so, it could perhaps turn all the droids on. So Ahsoka left, informing Bail and
Yeah.
Mon what she was planning to do. Padme and Obi-Wan would later find out. Ahsoka, Rex, and a handful of deserters moved to several locations across the galaxy, accessing ports inside of former Separatist battleships and foundries. What was most disappointing was the fact that they couldn't get the access codes, let alone the holo recording, which there was never one of. They believed if they could find Sidious or Vader telling the droids to shut down, then they would have it. But unlike the clones, Vader or Sidious never had to tell anyone. The command came from the center console and went into encrypted circuitry for the CIS military, shutting down every vessel and droid. So this led Rex and the clone deserters to find another plan of attack. If they could sneak aboard a Republic cruiser, they might be able to gather a recorded transmission from the Emperor about Order 66. That was perhaps the only thing that could expose Sidious. His lies were spreading. If they could show concrete proof that he was able to execute any order, then that might be able to do something for them. So because Topoka City hadn't been destroyed, they snuck aboard a light cruiser. There was an issue though. A cloaked figure was walking around said vessel, one that Ahsoka believed to be Sidious. She and the clones avoided the figure as they went into hiding within the vessel. They continued planning, Rex and the other men stealing some armor inside the barracks to fit in. They'd be able to use all their knowledge to get the information inside the informational center instead of Topoka City. When they landed, the clones quickly abandoned the ship. What wasn't known is that the vessel was being used to transport goods away from Kamino. The entire facility started emptying out. The current transport was going to be heading to Mount Tantus on Wayland. Regardless, Ahsoka was making sure the ship wouldn't be going anywhere. She was sneaking through the halls and then accidentally walked into the hangar bay. As she did, she came across the cloaked figure. Her lightsabers ignited, and so did the cloaked figures. She looked at him, and she knew it had to be Sidious, leaping across the room to engage with him. And in a moment of strength, she pulled away from the Sith Lord, and then slamming her blades into the cloaked man. She pulled back, watching the eyes go dim, and she smiled. She did it. She killed the Sith Lord. As she looked down, she realized that there was nothing inside the robes. Behind her, she heard her name. She turned to see a hologram of Darth Sidious. He raised his hand and she lifted off the ground. The Dark Lord told her that her skills were useful. She would lead them back to the Jedi and the Senators. Their little incursion was over. One of the clones shot a stun round into her body and she went limp, and Sidious dropped her. The clones were able to collect the information they needed before getting back into the ship. They realized Ahsoka was missing, so they quickly ran an extraction that worked almost too perfectly and got her out. Ahsoka was stunned badly, and on top of that, she'd been drugged by one of the Kaminoan scientists. So there was absolutely no way for her to disclose to the clones that something was awry. They got her back to their transport, and they abandoned as soon as they could. It was a very difficult mission, but they returned to Tython unscathed. Cities across the galaxy was able to see that they'd returned to their home base, and he couldn't help but notice how ironic it was. The Jedi would die in one of the most important places in their history. On Coruscant, as a fleet was sent to Tython, Vader exited his bacta tank. He wasn't assigned to do anything, so he was just going to go find his new master. He was hopeful to find out what was going on in this rebuilding process, as well as learn this whole Sith thing. Not for nothing, Vader had been ripping himself to shreds mentally. He couldn't really get over the entire loss he suffered on Mustafar. He truthfully wanted to take it all back. The days before he lost, he felt like he wasn't fully understanding everything, and now after all of his actions, he realized that perhaps killing all the Jedi to help someone's life wasn't really the right decision. Go figure. He would do anything to save Padme, but it seemed like she was gone due to him. Of course there was Obi-Wan, the man who stood between them. Kenobi took a fair share of that blame too, but Anakin knew in this moment that if he hadn't gone down the path he went down, then she wouldn't have come to Mustafar and been lost. Anyways, he walked out of the chambers and searched for his instructor. The royal guards didn't want him going anywhere, but instead of bending to their instruction, he threw them into the walls. Vader continued, finding a protocol droid and demanding answers. The droid, being a droid, informed him that Sidious was inside the Senate session. The topic of debate were the allies of Padme Amidala and the fabrication of her communication. Vader didn't know what this meant and demanded to see the message. The droid said that it was an encrypted file within the Senate building, only accessible from the Chancellor's console. Vader dragged an astromech to the Senate building and snuck into Palpatine's office. The droid pulled up the hologram, and in that instant, Vader knew that Padme had never died. Sidious lied to him. All the torment he suffered since his loss to Obi-Wan was a fabrication, one created by his master, one who deceived him to go down the dark path. Vader, while not familiar with his suit or how to use it, became obsessed with getting his revenge, using the Force to crush the pillar holding Palpatine's pod on it. The structure began to quickly topple over, and Sidious was quick to get off of it, using the Force to brace his fall. Masa Maeda, on the other hand, slammed into another pod, killing him and every member inside of it. As Palpatine tried to figure out what was happening, he turned back to see Darth Vader. All the live cameras, the ones broadcasting this out to every senator, or at least those with codes, were able to see what happened next. Vader leapt up, falling to the ground upon impact. Sidious turned over to see a student, confusion running through him. One moment he was speaking out against the rebels led by a fake Padme Amidala, and the next, he was bracing for impact. Vader struggled, asking his master if he was alright. Sidious looked over, and Vader lunged with all of his strength, his right knee slipping out from under him, but with the extra height, he reached out and grabbed Sidious's neck with all of his force. Sidious at the same time launched a burst of electricity forward, realizing that Vader was here to kill him. They're now both caught. Sidious was blasting his lightning, not having any lightsabers on him at the moment. Vader squeezed as hard as he could, both Sidious and Vader becoming consumed in a storm of force. Vader could feel the robotics inside of his suit tear him apart, and then he felt the pressure release. His body fell limp, and he, with the last sight in his eyes, saw Sidious drop to his knees and slouch over, dead. Vader didn't know if Padme was truly alive, but if she was, he knew that the greatest threat to her was the man who spent the previous 3 years trying to get her killed. It made Vader ashamed that he didn't notice it before, but now there was a chance for something to be fixed. Hopefully. As the rest of the senators watched Vader kill Sidious, they realized that Sidious was some sort of Jedi. He was another Dooku in their own mind. Being that the Sith had been wiped from existence millennia beforehand, no one knew that he was a Sith. No one knew what that was anyways. Bail, Padme, and Mon watched the events transpire because Palpatine wanted them distracted, and then the Force on Tython felt different. Using long-range binoculars, Rex was able to locate the Imperial fleet that arrived. As quickly as they could, they packed up the twins, taking both Tantive 4 and Padme's starship, and abandoned the planet. The clone dropships arrived just a little too late. Being that Tython was deep in the core, they were able to escape the planet and go somewhere else. Just as was feared by Obi-Wan and Padme, the Senate would erupt without leadership, though what they didn't predict was a lack of former CIS interference. This wasn't a choice, they just weren't able to, due to the martial law enacted on all their systems. Also the fact that the formerly Republic senators could only see the Senate set.
It ain't my dad's razor,
Oh,
Dad.
come
This
on.
green bar releases trapped hairs from my face for the ultimate Gillette shave.
The fact that the formerly Republic senators could only see the Senate session where Palpatine died at. Palpatine left it open for Padme's allies, believing he could use a desire for good against them, which he would have had Vader not sacrifice himself to kill him. The tragedy of the entire situation is that originally, Padme and Obi-Wan were going to sneak into the Senate session to disrupt it, but decided against it. The reason was mostly because they didn't believe they'd be able to get in. Ahsoka regained her cognitive functions and told them about the apparition she saw inside the Republic cruiser, so the Jedi believed that Palpatine was watching them, but Ahsoka wasn't able to inform them until they left Tython. But in a way, Palpatine was watching them. That's why the apparition was inside that vessel. He knew Ahsoka, Rex, and their men had been scavenging old CIS fleets. He just waited until they found a Republic vessel. The only thing Sidious didn't anticipate was his student finding out about Padme. That was a nail in the coffin, so now they all escaped Tython. The senators and the Jedi would make a stance inside the Senate. Instead of doing it in the middle of a session, they would do it as a surprise for the Senate. After several hours of cleanup and the Senate grinding to a halt, the senators all left, agreeing to meet again in the morning. Padme and her allies would take the time to show off everything they had. They had extensively valid information, especially because of the clones. They also had the trajectory logs from the vessel they were on, so Padme could reveal that there was something going on at Wayland. There was so much unknown at the moment, but the senators put together a message, one informing the Senate of everything. Sidious was a Sith, ancient rival of the Jedi, and so forth, explaining how he showed off such powers against Vader and survived the fall. There was information about the inhibitor chips provided by Rex and a couple of the clones. There was information revolving around Sidious's usage of Dooku and Skywalker to get what he wanted. Obi-Wan providing as many details as he could for that. It was close to a 4-hour presentation and it took all night to do. However, all their cramming would pay off. While the Senate wouldn't be overjoyed to hear about these turn of events, it was much better that everything was being kept quiet from the public. They wanted everything to have a smooth transition, so the Senate agreed to revoke the order set in place by Palpatine, which allowed the senators to return and stand their ground, those that were Padme's allies at least. All the while, Obi-Wan and Ahsoka would help Padme with the twins. They felt a sense of urgency to be there for them, because while Obi-Wan's last encounter with Vader wasn't Anakin, the man he cared deeply about would have been extremely grateful for his generosity, even in the face of such carnage. Yoda's exile would still be a burden on Obi-Wan, but with the Sith gone, aside from Maul, he brought the Jedi home. There was so much trauma attached to their temple, and so they would move their order to Tython. It was a peaceful world. Jocasta would oversee much of the rebuilding process, being that Obi-Wan vowed to take care of the children, similarly to how he promised to train Anakin when Qui-Gon died. Ahsoka would consider joining the Order, but a decision wouldn't come for another couple years. She stayed with Padme, Obi-Wan, Luke, and Leia. The Empire was politically a mess, but with brilliant political minds such as Padme, Bail, Mon, and Rio working dedicatedly to fix it, they were able to reduce the damage cities had done. It was a moment, and even more than that, an era of enlightenment. The Senate realized what they gave away due to the comfort of Palpatine. They wanted desperately to save their system, and so hard times created more passionate leaders. They were no longer simple politicians trying to earn a quick buck. They were helping their people the way they should have. The Jedi would be compensated, which would in no way undo the damage done. But the Empire realized that the Jedi were never the issue. Neither were the clones, being that the orders were out of their control. The Empire had a lot of work to do. Same with rebuilding the Jedi Order. But with figureheads of old dying out or changing their ways, both structures had a legitimate chance for change. Because of this new direction for the Empire, the Jedi and the Empire would eventually hunt down and destroy Crimson Dawn and kill Maul. The twins would have a loving family to grow up with. While they may have never had a biological father, Obi-Wan was as good of a role model as anyone could be. Basically, he was their father. He'd find his own peace and his own happiness through the twins. And
from a certain point of view, so it would be kind of the biological father, or the dad biologically. From a certain point of view.
As for his best friend, Padme, she would find her own sense of enlightenment. The twins would bring her joy unlike anyone ever could, and she would become the leading voice for legitimate change in a newly satisfied galaxy. And that, my friends, is our story. Again, special thanks to Galva Gaming, Tristan, Mandalore, Sir William 1767, Darth Revan, Grant D. Bane, Sky Guy, Laliand, Penguin, Cullen Rooney, Shark Midori, RJ38, Nick, Michael Erlanger, The Last Jedi, Apollo, Weewood 670, Annika Stank Runner, CT7567, Oz of Oz, Darth Nox, The Eternal Padawan, Joshua Tem, Jenny Guin, Saint Skeleton, Jedi Sloth, Mr. Geek Gamer, Lord Calig, Youngling Slayer 66, Madman Studios, Anakin 003, Lord Draken, 460 Star Wars, Erebus, Rex the Wolf, The Many Three First Names, Darksaint 46, Baron Joshua, and Lord Deadwing, Forceborn and Channel. Smash that like button. More otherwise, go check out Patreon. Season 3 of the Sith Clone Wars is being worked on at the moment. The outline is finished. I'm going to start working on the story. Otherwise, let's talk about this story. First things first. The Force Heal used by Obi-Wan isn't like a technical Force Heal. In the book Shadow of the Sith, Luke uses that kind of power to calm somebody, to really help them just kind of get through something painful, and I thought that'd be really cool for Obi-Wan to use. It's not like a direct Force Heal, which is something you'd find in like the older Jedi texts, but it's a comforting mechanism that would help Padme in that situation. For the broad of the story, I wanted to focus on the dynamic between Obi-Wan and Padme. They obviously don't end this off as a couple, but I wanted to focus on their dynamic as friends, because that's something that doesn't really get a lot of attention, not in Clone Wars or the movies, so I wanted to focus on their friendship as they have to deal with this traumatic loss. I think Padme would be like the only one person to stop Palpatine as the Empire was growing, and I think her influence was pushed forward faster because of Vader's sacrifice. So his sacrifice has more of an effect on her actual political career for the Empire, essentially, which benefits her and the twins, obviously. So I hope you all enjoyed. I love you all, spread the love, and always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.
With Cascade Platinum Plus, I load this and get this. Dare to dish differently.
That's the end of that. I'll put this stuff in the description below. And I'll be doing more reactions too like this in the future if you like it. But yeah, I'll be making another reaction later tonight or sometime in the next couple of hours I might do another reaction. But to another channel. But yeah. Subscribe, like, and share if you like these reaction videos that I'm doing. And the original videos will be in the description below if you want to check out the original videos as well. And I'll see you next time. Bye for now.